Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 23 of Outlaw Star. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So as we left off, Jean managed a successful escape from a seemingly unescapable prison on a highly gravitational planet, and in so doing, he managed to find the coordinates of the galactic ley line. However, before everyone can really get down to business solving problems at the galactic ley line, they have to take a break at the legally mandated Hot Springs planet. Now, there was a little hint that Jean would be essentially seeking out ammunition for his caster. Why that sort of stuff would be found on a Hot Springs planet is kind of beyond me, seeing as how, really, the main draw of a hot spring is, ideally the relaxation, but also the other people. And, I feel like magical munitions is, probably not something you're gonna find 9 times out of 10. Oh dear, we don't even have the opening music. I guess we're just getting right into it. Well, fair enough, I suppose. This is, after all, the most important episode. I mean, when you think about it, like a hot spring, that's not something we have right around where I live, but they're probably nice, you know? Alright, silly me, I guess they did have the opening music after all. But, I don't know, I feel like they just had to give us like an extra 30 seconds looking at the planet and watching the Outlaw Star make planetfall. I feel like that's, not the purpose of the episode, and instead the purpose is, all the people enjoying the hot springs, mainly beautiful women. Now, I guess it's, none too surprising that the planet is rather cavalier about getting people to enjoy the hot springs, to the point where they're just sort of like grabbing them and throwing them in changing rooms. I guess to some extent, when in Rome, you must do as the Romans do, which in this case is enjoy the hot springs, but I don't know. There's something oddly forthright about the whole thing. Like, if I were to just sort of like set foot on this planet, I would be wondering what the deal is here. Why is everyone so intent on me having fun in their prescribed method? Because, like, sure, enjoying nice weather and hot springs is all well and good, but, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to swim in the ocean. There's nothing wrong with sitting on the beach, enjoying the weather. Now that's something. So according to rumors, these old wizards who make these caster shells are on the Hot Springs planet. Yeah. So it seems like Jean's kind of made a tactical mistake here believing rumors, seeing as how everyone else sort of has a different understanding of what they are, be they, made by wizards or the product of lost ancient technology or what have you. And, come to think of it, if you're just, immediately believing an old hag who says, check out this temple, it may be over. This isn't to say that you can't really trust any old hag, but, I don't know. I think they're more trustworthy in a sort of, general wisdom sense rather than a factual description of reality kind of a sense, if that makes any sense. Now, to Jim's credit, he's making the good point that, maybe we should just go to the ley line now that we have the coordinates. And, it turns out that is probably a rather prescient bit of insight on his part, seeing as how there are people who still have it out for the Outlaw Star's crew. Now, perhaps unfortunately, Melfina has decided to butt in by saying, hey, what is a hot spring, by the way? And, I guess one way or another, she's gonna learn. But, I don't know. Maybe, the giant hot spring planet isn't the ideal introduction to things. I guess in no small part because there was seemingly an assassin after them. And, even though he has been foiled by the idiosyncrasies of the train, something tells me he's not going to give up, even if he will be sort of surreptitiously foiled by circumstances. Wow, that is a rather expansive facility. And they call it hot springs, but it's more like a water park in my mind. Oh dear, Jim. Poor little guy, he's landed right in the lion's den, so to speak, He's just here to enjoy the hot springs and the water slide and all that, and the women are on him like predatory animals. Yeah, it seems like no one's really having a good time here, except maybe Melfina. Jim is being preyed upon, Suzuka's just not having a good time, the hot springs are not sufficiently hot enough for Aisha Clan, and, Jean's just trying to find caster shells. So, maybe Melfina's got, the long end of the stick, I guess, to sort of invert the idiom. But, yeah, I don't know. Good for her, I suppose, considering how kind of dangerous things have been for her lately. So I do find it interesting that Jean's caster sort of started working in the presence of these statues. With the understanding that caster shells are sort of imprisoned spells and all that are fired off in bullets, I guess it does sort of make sense that despite being a bit of technology, it would sort of behave oddly in the presence of other supernatural things. I guess it's probably something that's never been sufficiently explained, the true nature of caster shells and all that. And really, at this late in the game, I feel like we're not gonna learn too much. I feel like we probably shouldn't either. I think it's really just sufficient to know that it's, it's just kind of magic. So maybe Jean shouldn't have hassled this guy. As one of the quote-unquote wizards. I don't know. It doesn't do to hack off the guy. Especially if he's one of the only sources of caster shells. Well, that's interesting. This little history lesson that the word caster used to refer to wizards themselves, and that the caster used to be called a spell gun. I feel like that's, maybe anachronistic isn't the right word, but it's like, why did it have a more practical name and then a less clear name later on? If anything, I feel like it would have been called a caster, and then, laymen, people who don't really understand spells and all that, would call it a spell gun. So that's something. There are various types of caster shells, some of which are much more rare than the others, and apparently only some people can make certain shells. This is, not necessarily a new development. I feel like we did sort of know this, but, it's really not good for Gene, just because he's gonna have to go on a veritable odyssey just to get the shells he was missing. And more to the point, we don't necessarily know what it is those specific shells do. I believe Gene really just said he wanted to have a full set, just for the variety of it, which, when you get down to it, having a variety of munitions is probably, not a bad idea, but I don't know. If it provides an extra special utility, we don't know what it is. Oh, dear. So Gene's striking a bargain here. He just has to take some footage of the top of a mountain where the one wizard has forbidden men to enter. It seems to me that this is going to be very hazardous to Gene's health. Not only does he have to go where he's not wanted, but he has to take clandestine footage as well. I guess the idea is he will get a couple nifty shells out of it, but is it really worth the potential bodily harm? Seems to me the answer might be no. Now, I do have to question whether or not this assailant is one of the assassins, because if he is, he's rather poor at his job, having, in his headlong rush to charge Gene, ran straight off a cliff. I feel like no real serious assassin would be caught dead doing something like that. Especially one of the, supposed 7 really, really dangerous assassins hired by the pirate lords. Now, I feel like, despite having charged off a cliff as he did, that's probably not the last we're gonna see of that guy. Wow, that's, something alright. Sitting in a hot spring, in the cold, drinking sake. I guess I can see why that appeals to Suzuka, but, I guess understandably, Eijitan Clan is still dissatisfied. Being the freakish alien that she is, I feel like, she's gonna have to have something like truly boiling. I don't know how hot springs get generally, but I feel like they're probably comparable to like a warm bath, warm enough to like sit in and lounge around and relax, but not hot enough to like burn you or cause any adverse health conditions after too long. Because, that sort of thing can happen if you sit in like a hot tub for too long, especially if it's too hot. You get dizzy and stuff like that. It's not good for you. Now, unfortunately for Gene, despite trekking most of the way up the mountain, he has sort of inadvertently triggered a booby trap. So, whether this is truly the product of just men not being allowed or what, the poor guy's gonna have to contend with a bunch of stuff. The assassin is easily the least of his concerns at this point. Although I feel like, seeing as how, he's trekking up this snow-covered mountain wearing little more than a bathing suit, maybe he should, I don't know, take a slightly different approach. If only just by, like, dressing for the weather. Well, at least, oh, never mind. I was gonna say, Gina has the good grace that despite falling in the bath with Suzuka and Melfina, he just sort of resigns himself to climbing the mountain again. But, he can't help but, like, stop and look back just in case, I mean, take the opportunity when it presents itself, but, surely there's more time for oogling later. You can climb the mountain and settle all your business first. Oh dear. So it seems like Aisha has well and truly found something to her liking, but, rather than a normal hot spring, it appears to be, magma. Which, doesn't seem remarkably survivable to me, but, wow, Aisha's oddly sanguine about this whole, peeping in the hot springs business. I mean, sure, it wasn't, Jean's intention specifically, but, yeah, I don't know. It's odd that she's so sanguine about the whole thing. I feel like her pride as a Katarl would, disallow a lowly human peeping at her, So poor Jean, it seems as though he's climbed the mountain for nothing. There is no apparent temple. But just because it's not apparent doesn't mean it's not there. I feel like a canny temple builder would perhaps disguise the temple such that even if someone who did want to invade made it, they would be effectively dissuaded by virtue of not finding anything immediately. So I guess good on Jean, perseverance has yielded results. He has found, seemingly maybe allegedly, a temple, although it doesn't seem like much of a temple to me. Although, given all the buxom women, he's probably not too concerned about whether or not they're actually praying or anything. Now, Jean seems to be making a bit of a tactical mistake here by breaking a window in the ceiling. I feel like, rather than doing that, he should perhaps dig around a bit, try and find a door, I guess it's kind of moot at this point, but that seemed to be a pretty large drop from the ceiling. And even if you don't break your neck doing that, I feel like, the people who run the temple aren't going to be too happy at the intrusion. Okay, so the wizard Erd here, she's just sort of like, kind of forgiven the intrusion, which, I guess that's awfully gracious of her, although it's mainly due to the fact that he has the caster. Wow, so Jean's being, oddly straightforward about everything, about, the proposal for getting more caster shells. Yeah, I don't know, I guess seeing as how the wizard is willing to play ping pong with him and all that, and like talk about this, sort of rather openly, it seems like she might be willing to go along with the plan, Hard to say, really. Ooh. So this woman is not to be messed with. She has raised the stakes here. Or perhaps more accurately, she's matched the bet and checked. It's like, okay, yeah, you can record if you win, but I'm gonna record stuff too, so I don't know. I feel like giving the absolute conga line of humiliation he's put up with, maybe, that's the better alternative, you've climbed up the mountain a dozen times, you've fallen down the mountain, one time less than that. Ooh. Something tells me that having not verified the footage himself, Gene might have been fooled. Alright. So the wizards have only given Gene one of each of the other shells, but at the same time, they're bringing up that it's like really potent magic, so watch out. But oh dear. So I guess it's magic that saps your own strength. Yeah, very dangerous. But I don't know. I feel like things are gonna get real interesting once they use that footage, if my memory serves. Because, Gene presumably didn't really proofread it, and he's just sort of been given the shells up front. So it seems to me they're probably gonna get the short end of the stick, So Ert was seemingly as good as her word initially, I do find it interesting that she apparently had, like, a backdrop prepared for such a thing. That it speaks to a degree of preparation that I guess is really only befitting of, like, a person who decides to live on a temple on a mountaintop. Now, despite ostensibly giving them everything they want, I feel like the countdown is rather ominous, At least Gene has a proper understanding that, this probably isn't a good thing, but I guess that just kind of goes out the window when you have a Calipegian spectacle to watch instead. Yeah, unfortunately, he probably should have paid more attention to the countdown, but I guess it's kind of a moot point now. I guess really the only hope is that the explosion didn't cook off the caster shells, because then everything would be well and truly have been for nothing. Well, at least there is some understanding that, yeah, despite being blown up, it was kind of worth it, so I guess you can't be too mad. Alright, so it seems like we're probably going to have to reckon with that assassin now, seeing as how this is probably his last opportunity to do anything. Unfortunately for the poor guy, he was just a little too late to board the train, so, I reckon his pay's probably going to get docked over this, That's a rather embarrassing display. Well, that's it then. After what could have been a relaxing sort of vacation, the crew is now heading for the galactic ley line, and they are now about as optimally prepared as they can be in terms of munitions. So the question is, what's at the ley line, and what sort of horrors are they going to encounter? Everyone keeps mentioning that he has red hair. I've noticed that, and it seems like it's probably gonna feature somewhat prominently. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.